Hi, I'm Edward Thomson. Today, I'd like to talk to you about GitHub Actions. And GitHub Actions is a new product from GitHub that performs continuous integration and continuous delivery right within your repository. So um, my name is Edward Thomson. I'm a product manager at GitHub. I currently work on NPM. So if you're a JavaScript developer, I suspect you're familiar with NPM. So I'm the product manager there. But prior to that, prior to GitHub's acquisition of NPM, I was a product manager on the GitHub Actions team. And so I'm super excited about Actions. I think it's a really great product. And something I still use and am still passionate about, even though I'm not actually directly the product manager for Actions anymore. It's in very, very capable hands without me. So the idea behind GitHub Actions, if you're not familiar with it, is that it wants to be a CI/CD system, but it wants to be more than just that. Our goal is to actually enable myriad workflows with GitHub Actions that don't live within the traditional CI/CD space. We want to still do CI/CD. We want to do it really well, but we also want to enable other scenarios within your repository. And the reason is because we like to think that GitHub is how people build software. And I think that most of us interact with GitHub in some manner or another on an incredibly regular basis. I, of course, store all my projects on GitHub, but even if you don't, even if you are using, some other technology to store your code, maybe Bitbucket, maybe GitLab, maybe you're hosting your own Git server under your desk, you still end up interacting with GitHub. Maybe not even directly, but at this point in time, almost all of the tools that we use as developers are open source. And so that means that even if we're not interacting directly with GitHub for our own repositories, we're using tools that were built on GitHub, and we're often filing issues or downloading source from those tools. And so one of the things that we're really passionate about at GitHub is allowing developers to use our platform. And when we talk about that, we often think about the ways that developers want to actually extend our platform. Because as developers, I don't want to speak for you, but speaking for myself, I often see a tool or a piece of software, and I'm really excited about it, but it's not always perfect. And GitHub is not perfect. We can't do everything for everybody, but we want to allow you to take this platform and extend it where that makes sense for you. And looking back historically, the way that we did this was with a piece of technology called GitHub Apps. And the idea behind a GitHub app is it's something that you can build and you can create. And it's really taking two different parts of the GitHub platform and kind of mashing them up in a way that you can leverage that. The idea is that GitHub will send you a webhook. And webhooks have been a part of GitHub since as long as I can remember. The idea is that when something happens on the GitHub platform, let's say somebody comments on an issue, we'll open a HTTP request to an endpoint that you've designated, and we'll send you a JSON payload with the data about what happened, about the issue that was commented on in this case. And in response, you can turn around and call GitHub back with our REST API using something like OctoKit, which is the REST API that we've made available, where you can just, I don't know, you can use curl if you want, right? We're all developers. We're going to make it happen no matter what, right? The idea here is that you could build whatever you wanted on top of GitHub. You could fundamentally extend the GitHub platform to do whatever it was you wanted anytime this issue was commented on. The problem with GitHub apps, though, is that you're on the hook for running your own infrastructure. You've got to run this server yourself. You've got to pay the bills. You've got to maintain it. If it's sometimes this is something that's really well taken care of and sitting in a data center and professionally managed. It's got SREs, that sort of thing. Sometimes it's a server under your desk that you kick over and you don't know why your automations are failing until you realize that this machine's been off for several weeks, and that's no good. So that was really the first thing that we set out to fix, for lack of a better term, with GitHub Actions. We wanted to give you the power of GitHub Apps so that you could build custom tooling on top of the GitHub platform, but we wanted to do it in a way that we took care of the infrastructure. And so that's really what GitHub Actions are. The idea is that you can still respond to all of these same webhooks, and you can still perform a response as well, but we're actually providing the infrastructure for you. And the first beta of GitHub Actions was very much this. It was very much designed around building an apps replacement where you could run whatever code you wanted inside our containers. Basically you published a Docker container, we would run it every time a webhook happened, and you could send a response. We were really excited about GitHub Actions. We thought it was great. We thought it would solve all the problems of apps, and that you now didn't have to pay for the infrastructure. The problem with the original beta of GitHub Actions, though, was that we were running in a Docker container. And it turns out that the thing that people really wanted to automate in their repository was the build and release process. And so the first thing that people started to do was to try to do builds. And if you've got like a Node app, maybe you're writing a Node app in TypeScript and your goal is to convert that to JavaScript, running a TypeScript translation, not a lot of resources. No problem. We can handle that sort of build workflow. The problem was when somebody wanted to do something like build a bunch of C. The C compiler is a little bit more expensive to run. Or still, if somebody wanted to build a Mac application, now all of a sudden you can't do that in a Docker container. It turns out that Apple's requirements for actually building iOS or macOS applications require you to actually do it on a Mac. And so this was a serious pain point for people. So we brought out this tool in beta that we were really excited about, and people started using it and really quickly gave us feedback that it wasn't meeting their needs. So we actually paused the beta program. We thought about it a little bit, and we came back with a revamped version of GitHub Actions. And the new version allows you to actually run your workflows on any kind of virtual machine, be it macOS, Linux, or Windows. So we actually don't require you to build in a Docker container anymore. You still can. You can still run your GitHub Actions workflows in a Docker container if you want, but we give you a full virtual machine. And the reason we do that is to allow bigger, more custom applications to be built so that you can build on things like macOS, so that you can build your iOS applications, to build on Windows in case you're running, building actual Windows apps, or something on .NET Framework, for example, that just isn't going to run inside that container. And so this is the new GitHub Actions that we actually we have today. We're really excited about it. So we think that it's the best of both of these two worlds. We can do all these heavy-duty CI/CD workflows, but we can also still respond to anything that happens in your GitHub repository. So you can still build around the GitHub Apps platform, and we'll still take care of the infrastructure for you. So we're really, really excited about GitHub Actions. Let me actually walk you through a bit of a demo. There we go. So this is my GitHub repository. This is this is just a Node.js application that I have. It's a really simple one. It is a pocket calculator. If you're as old as I am, you'll remember when we didn't have phones in our pockets. We had pocket calculators, and we were able to type 2 + 2, hit equals, and get 4. And so that's actually the Node app that I built here. It's actually a HTML, JavaScript, and CSS front end with that talks over a REST API to actually do the calculations. So it's wildly over-engineered. So there's a Node backend that will listen for these REST requests and do the arithmetic and then send the data back. So if you're wondering why 8 times 7 is a little slow, you can actually see it flash. That's why. It's actually hitting a REST API. Totally wildly over-engineered, but you know, it was fun to build. And so I've got it right here. And this is actually an open source project. And one of the things that I always want to do in my, well, really in any project, but especially in my open source projects, is to have a good CI build workflow. And the important thing here, especially, is that I want to be able to accept pull requests from the public, but when somebody opens a pull request, I want to do my build, if there is a build, and I want to run all my tests. And I do have a nice test framework here in this application, and I want to make sure that runs. I'm really passionate about CI and CD. Early in my career, I had a job, and this was before CI/CD was commonplace. I had a coworker. I had a coworker named Jeff, and Jeff was a good programmer, but he wasn't the most disciplined programmer. And every day, when it was time for him to go home, he would just check in whatever he'd been working on, get in his car, and drive away. And probably 2 days a week, it would turn out that there would be a problem with that code that he'd been writing. And I don't know, every 2 weeks, let's say, maybe a month, it wouldn't even build. Like, he wouldn't even bother to build this code before he checked it in. And it was the most frustrating experience. So I became very, very passionate about continuous integration, build and test workflows. And so one of the things that I want to do is make sure that I can always build and test this repository. And I want to do that with GitHub Actions. So you may have noticed, if you use GitHub, that you've now got an Actions tab at the top of your repository. If you click on that, that's where, well, that's where GitHub Actions lives for this repo. And the first thing that we do when you start setting up a new GitHub Actions workflow is we look at the code that you're building. We look at your repository. We try to understand what is in that repository. And we use the same mechanism that we use over here at GitHub. This is a tool called Linguist. And what it does is it analyzes your repository. It looks at the content and tries to figure out what kind of code you have. And in fact, I have a lot of HTML, CSS, and yeah, JavaScript. And so when GitHub Actions gets started, it will look at this code and it will give you workflows designed to build your JavaScript package. In this case, I've got 2 options. I can either build a Node package and publish it up to NPM, or I can build a Node app and run the tests. And that's what I want to do. So I can just click set up this workflow. And this default workflow that we've created and we're suggesting to you is actually really pretty good. So I'm just going to go ahead and check it into the repository. And when I do, I will kick off my first CI build, because it will be the first new commit in my master branch since I added this. And so if I click on the Actions tab, you can see it running. So while that runs, it won't take very long, but while that runs, what I want to do is actually walk you through what we just checked in. And this is the YAML file that we suggested for you, and it's what describes a GitHub Actions workflow run. We use YAML in GitHub Actions. It's kind of the lingua franca of DevOps tooling. You know, there's quite a bit of YAML, so we're not, you know, we use it as well. I'm going to actually just click Edit, and actually you can see one thing that's really nice about GitHub Actions. In our YAML, we actually have some squigglies when you get something wrong. But more importantly, we have some suggestions. So if I want to, there we go, start adding a new token, it'll suggest to me some of the tokens that are available. So that really smooths away a lot of the pain points. If you groaned, thank you for being on mute, if you groaned when I said that we use YAML, I really feel like the built-in editor here does a great job of helping solve some of the really common problems with using YAML. So I'm actually really happy about the YAML. But let's walk through what our YAML actually looks like. So the first thing that we do when we define a GitHub Actions workflow is we give it a name. In this case, the name is node.js CI. It could be CI, it could be, you know, my friendly build, it could be whatever you want it to be. The important part after that, though, is that we have triggers. So like I said, with an app, what we want to do is define something that will run on a GitHub event, on some event in your GitHub repository. That is what this trigger section is. We're going to run this workflow on pushes to the master branch and pull requests to the master branch. That means that every time somebody opens a pull request against master, we'll run this workflow on their pull request, on that code. And when somebody pushes into the master branch by running either git push or by clicking merge on a pull request, or just editing a file through the GitHub user interface. Anytime somebody gets code into master, we'll run this workflow. And what we're going to do is we're going to run a single job. A job will run in parallel, and that job will be called build. We're going to run the job on Ubuntu latest, so the latest version of the Ubuntu operating system, so our Linux virtual machines will run this job. And we'll run a number of steps. I'm skipping over this matrix, I'll come back to that in just a second. We're just gonna run a number of steps. What we're gonna do is we're gonna check out the code, because unlike most traditional CI/CD systems, there's no guarantee that you even want the code, right? If you were running something on an issue comment, you might not want code at all. So this needs to be an explicit thing that says you want to check out the code. Whoops, wrong button, pardon me. Get rid of that. So after that, we're going to set up the version of node that you want. So we're going to put node and npm in the path at the version that you request. Then we're going to run npm CI to restore our dependencies, npm run build if there is in fact a build step, and then npm test. So we're going to build everything, test everything, and we're going to do it on this version of node. Well, actually that's a variable, isn't it? So this is my favorite part of GitHub Actions is our matrix system. So the matrix is a really easy way to build more powerful workflows. And it seems kind of complicated at first, at least it was for me, but it's actually really straightforward. The idea is that when you define a matrix, you give it a key and several values, and we will build out one job for every value in the matrix. And in fact, you could make this a multi-dimensional matrix. You could say OS, Ubuntu, and Windows. And now what'll actually happen is we will run a job for every pair of these. So what we will do is we will actually take these steps and just do variable substitution on every version of the matrix that you specified. So we'll come through here and we will run with node version 10.x, node version 12.x, and node version 14.x. We'll actually just get rid of this. So I said that there was one job defined. We only define the one job, but by using a matrix, we actually get 3 jobs. So we'll run these in parallel. We'll do a very thorough build matrix. So we'll make sure that we're compatible with node 10, node 12, and node 14. And if I come up here to actions, I can see what actually happened when I checked the code in. So there we go, I've got a green build, that's good. And in fact, over here, you can see each of the legs of the matrix building on node 10, node 12, and node 14. So if I click into that, you can actually see all the information about our build. So that's very exciting. We got a good run, and we can actually make sure that this validates the things that we actually want to check for. I can make a change that is a little riskier and open a pull request and see what happens in that workflow. So I'm going to click through, and again, this is a REST API, so I've got I've got a controller here that actually responds to requests and does the arithmetic. Again, super over-engineered. But if you ever need 1 + 1 as a service, I've got you covered. But if I were a new contributor, if I were coming into this project and taking a look at what it might be able to do for me, if I wanted to contribute as an open source contributor, the first thing that I actually notice is that this set of functions is a little weird. So these are our operations for our REST API. We can subtract and we return a minus b. We can multiply and we return a times b. And we can divide and we return a divided by b. And it's all very straightforward. It's add that looks a little funny. We're actually returning plus a plus b, and that doesn't make sense. That's not how you do arithmetic, is it? No, we want to be able to just do a plus b. There we go. Just do a plus b, right? What's this plus a plus b business? I don't understand it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to propose a pull request. So I'll click that, and that'll create a new branch for me, and then I can click create pull request. I suspect you're familiar with this sort of workflow. And the first thing that we see is that this little area turns green very quickly and says that there are no conflicts. That means that there are no merge conflicts. We haven't made changes that we would need to merge the master branch back in. But very quickly it turns into some builds starting. And again, this is across our matrix, so node 10, 12, and 14. And really quickly, we actually get a failing build. Well, that's weird. So let me click in, and I'll take a look at what happened. You can see that this step failed. It's red. And if we scroll down, we actually get to see our test output. And if we scroll, if you're not familiar with this sort of test output format, it's sort of in Git diff format. So the plus sign is the result that we expected. The minus sign is the result that we got. And, right. So the actual test itself was adding two numbers. It turns out that we were taking 21 and 21 and trying to add them in our REST API. And we expect to get back 42 because that is 21 plus 21. What we got back was 2, 1, 2, 1. So it turns out that we were doing string concatenation instead of actually arithmetic addition. And that's a little JavaScript trick. The plus a coerces it into a number because types are hard. And so the tricky bit that we have we actually changed was that our so our actual arithmetic devolved into string concatenation. And that's not what we want at all. So we don't want to take this pull request, but it's really nice that we have a unit test that catches that. So yes, as was noticed, Adam, thank you. That is in fact why you add comments when you're doing type coercion. But if you hadn't added comments, this is a nice way to catch that that something has gone a little bit wrong. So that's a really simple example, just an out-of-the-box sort of problem. So the other thing that I mentioned is CD. So if you're not familiar with this notation, I've talked about CI, which is continuous integration, which tends to be how we talk about doing builds and running tests. Then there's also CD, which stands for continuous delivery, which is the notion that once we do a build, we want to be able to get it deployed very quickly, either to a staging server or all the way to production. And GitHub Actions has a really nice sort of system that allows you to do continuous delivery builds, or rather deployments as well. So sorry, let me just pull this up right here. So there we go. If I go back to the Actions tab, so now that I've set up an action, by default, I'll just see my workflows, but I can also click New Workflow, and that'll take me back through that experience where I can choose a workflow. And the first thing that you notice is that we suggest some workflows for you for, again, examining your repository and trying to give you a suggestion. But after that, we've also got some workflows, and our partners across the various cloud providers like Tencent and Google Cloud have actually worked with GitHub to build these workflows out. And so I actually use Azure. I used to work at Microsoft, so I'm familiar with Azure more than the others. So I'm going to set up an Azure deployment workflow, and this will actually deploy to production. This is my production environment right here. And so there's some really, this is well documented, and it's a very easy change to make to get you into Azure. The AWS and the Google templates are very, very similar. I actually have a workflow that I like, and so I'm going to do this deploy whenever I create a release. I'm going to go ahead and commit this now. I'm going to start the release process to actually do this deploy, and then we will, I'll walk through what it's actually doing. Let me actually show that there is, in fact, a change being made before I do. So I'm going to go into my public directory. I'm going to change the CSS a little bit. We'll make the calculator red instead of blue. And so to do that, I'm going to change my background color, and I'm going to change my background image, and I'm going to check it straight into master. Please don't do that. Please use your CI system gate on it with pull requests, but obviously this is just a demo. Great, and so now that that's in, I'm going to create a new release. There we go, it's right there. Moved around a little bit on me on the UI. So let's call it v1.0, and we'll click publish. And now when I do that, if I go over to the Actions tab, please correct the errors below. Oh, I'm sorry. No, master is fine. Let's try again. Maybe just a little spontaneous error. Well, oh, do I need to give the tag a name? Have I forgotten how to do a release on GitHub? I, in fact, have. Okay, now that we've created a release, we can go to the Actions tab, and we'd expect to see a few workflows. The first one we'd expect to see is when we did our change, and this is just our CI rather build. It ran just to make sure that what we checked into the master branch was still able to be built, the unit test still passed. And I've also got this new workflow that's running. And it's the build and deploy workflow, and this is actually deploying my Azure web app. So what's that doing? As I mentioned, I'll talk through this YAML while that deploy is going. It's relatively quick, but obviously not instantaneous. So just like before, we've got some YAML, and as I said, we're going to run on a release. So every time a release is created, this workflow will run, and it'll run the one job that is build and deploy. It'll run it on an Ubuntu virtual machine. It'll check our code out. It will do the build in node 12. So we don't have a matrix again. We want to emulate our production environment, which is node 12. We don't want necessarily, in this case, to do the deploy on a matrix. We want to do just one deploy. Our build step is going to validate the tests pass. I do think that that's a good habit. You know, no reason to deploy something if the tests don't work. And then finally, we're going to do this. And this is a little weird. So instead of run is pretty straightforward, I think. We're just running the code that's specified there. We're going to run the, we've got this uses tag, and uses has a particular format. This is going to run an action. And this is where GitHub Actions gets its names. So we have workflows that do the work, and they can use actions, which are reusable components that somebody else has built, in this case, the Azure team, that we can reuse within all of our workflows. And so a good example of this is a web app deploy action. This is just some code that will run as part of your workflow to do a deployment of a web app. And it'll just take some variables, in this case, my app name and my published profile. And I've gone ahead and set this up so that I don't show you my secrets. Obviously, I trust all of you. It's the people watching, you know, later on YouTube that I'm a little less sure of. But what that'll do is it'll replace a secret in my repository. And so these are write once, and then GitHub Actions can read them, and you can't see them again after you've created it. And they'll also be masked in any output in your log. So if we were to try to say print the secret out as part of this run, it would just get replaced by stars. And so that job, that action that the Azure team has published is what allows us to do this web app deploy really easily. And so now if I come back here and reload, I expect it to, in fact, be read. So we can see that our workflow did, in fact, do this publish. So I'm really happy with the deployment capabilities that are built into GitHub Actions, and we're actually continuing to work on that and invest in that. So really excited about that. So I've talked a lot about workflows, and those are the things, again, that we write that actually do our builds. And we can write those to run on Linux, as you've seen. We can run them on Windows if you've got a .NET application like I do here. In that case, when I go to the Actions tab, I can select, there we go, .NET Core, for example, or .NET Core Desktop. And instead of runs on Ubuntu latest, I could run this on Windows latest. And if I start that commit, that'll kick off that job. And I've also got, there we go. I've also got here an iOS application. And when I go to the Actions tab here, it's going to analyze my repository, understand that I'm running, that I'm building Swift, and offer me to build that. But I can also, if I scroll down and expand out all the continuous integration workflows, I can find Objective-C as well. And these workflows, if I set that up, will actually run on macOS latest. And so that's one of the things that is very handy about having our own data centers. We've got them full of Linux boxes, Windows boxes, and yes, Macs, so that we can build whatever workflow that you want on whatever kind of architecture that you want. So that's a real quick introduction to the CI and CD portions of GitHub Actions. The other thing that I want to briefly mention is one of the things that I love about having GitHub Actions right inside the GitHub platform, and that is that there is really strong tie-in between GitHub Actions and the other GitHub products, right? We looked at editing a file, our YAML file, directly in the repository, and we saw how GitHub Actions, sorry, the text editor understands GitHub Actions YAML syntax and will provide you suggestions and red squigglies when things go wrong. There are a number of other integrations that we have between GitHub Actions and other products. For example, GitHub Packages. So I'm back at my calculator application, and if you look here, I've got a Docker file. I actually generally package this up as a Docker file, and that's actually the way I do development. I love actually developing in a Docker container. And if I go to the Actions tab and click New Workflow, one of the suggestions that we have is around Docker containers. And if I click out more workflows and search for Docker, we'll see some of them. In fact, the deployment workflows are centered around Docker, but that's not it. If we keep searching, there we go, publish Docker container. This is a workflow that Docker has actually contributed. Like I said, we've got a lot of partners that we work with to build things, build workflows that suit both of our joint customers. So in this case, Docker has contributed this workflow. And what it'll do is it will publish to GitHub packages. If you're not familiar with GitHub packages, this is a place where, if I go back to my code tab, this is actually a place where you can host your Ruby gems or your NPM packages that maybe you don't want to post to those, publish to those public registries. Concretely, I publish packages to NPM, the public NPM registry, npmjs.com, when I'm ready to release them, when I'm ready for other people to use them. But I publish those same packages to GitHub packages when I am building them so that I can download them, so that I can NPM install them locally on my machine for even a pull request. And so those packages actually live right here, and I can use those, use packages out of GitHub packages instead of necessarily going to the public registries. So if I click in to the Actions tab, we can see that the Docker, there we go, the Docker workflow is doing its thing right now. It's going to build its image. It's going to log into GitHub packages. And again, there is some nice integration between GitHub Actions and GitHub packages. And the cool thing here is that your Actions run actually has a personal access token. It's a very short period of time. It's very narrowly scoped, but one of the things that this token can do is publish packages into GitHub packages on the same registry that the action is running in. That means that there's no messing with keys or tokens. You can just build a workflow that runs a push of a Docker container or an NPM package or a Ruby gem directly into your repository. And if I come back to my repo and look in the packages tab, I in fact now have that package uploaded. And so I can click into it and get instructions about how to use this package from within GitHub packages instead of from Docker Hub. So I've got a private place to store packages within my team or like pre-release versions that I can share with the entire internet. And it's easy to build a GitHub Actions workflow to produce those. Very, very exciting. It's one of my favorite pieces, especially being on the NPM team. The other cool integration that I just real briefly want to talk about is with some of GitHub's security products. So I'm not sure if you've ever seen this notice. This is a tool called Dependabot, which will analyze your repository, look at the dependencies that you're using, the open source packages that you depend on, and compare the list of packages that you are using with a list of CVEs. CVE is something that stands for Common Vulnerability and Exposure. A CVE is basically a listing of a security problem in a package. And so concretely, if there's a bug in, I don't know, Lodash version 1.2, and then there's a CVE produced that describes this security vulnerability, we can look at your repository, see if you are using a version of Lodash that is vulnerable, and we can alert you to that. And I don't really mean to pick on Lodash. it just turns out that I have that problem. So this is the same calculator application that I was building, and this happened to me organically. I didn't actually set this up. One day I got this message, and I thought, wow, I actually want to save this repository. So please don't, go use this. This is called calculator.bad. It's called bad intentionally. And if I click into the security alert, you can see exactly what happened. I was in fact building on a version of Lodash, and there is a critical severity vulnerability with this version. And if I click on that a little bit more, it tells me exactly what the problem is. I was using Lodash version 4.17.11. That has a vulnerability. And this is important stuff. This is serious business. It turns out that a credit bureau in the U.S. got hacked based on something running on their front-end web server. Somebody found out that it was running an old version of some library, some Java package, I forget which exactly. They got into the web server and then started using that to jump off to deeper parts of the network, and eventually got to a database that had American credit information. And that's now why, my identity has been thefted. As an American, you've got about a 50-50 chance of being in this breach. And it was all because of an old version of a dependency on a website. So this is serious business. And Dependabot can actually help with these sorts of problems. And it will define exactly what you need to do to solve the problem. But more importantly, it will open a pull request. And because there's a pull request, that means there are also GitHub Actions builds if you've set that up. So now I have a really high degree of confidence that Dependabot has done a good job in upgrading this dependency, right? Because what it's done is it's actually created a pull request with the change to introduce the new version. It's removed Lodash 4.17.11 and it's added 4.17.15. So it's fixing my security problem for me. And I know that it's done a good job because all my tests still pass. Now, this assumes I have good test coverage, which I certainly hope you do, but I have a high degree of confidence with this. So I'm very excited. Finally, just within the last couple minutes, we've talked a lot about workflows. We've defined some workflows. We hinted about actions and how you can use them as part of your workflows, and that a lot of people are building actions to do that. And these are again reusable components. They're actually node packages. They're written in JavaScript because that's a nice portable scripting language. If you want to start taking advantage of these actions, they're in the GitHub Marketplace. And so you can explore a number of actions that have been built by our partners. I just need to click on the Actions tab. There we go. Here's one from CodeCov. So if you want to enable CodeCov a little bit more easily in your GitHub Actions workflow, no problem. Same with coveralls. Axosoft has some tools that integrate with GitKraken Glow boards. So you could, when a new issue is created, really easily add it to a Glow board, move it around, that sort of thing. And so there are many, many actions, both around CI/CD, and you can find those in these tabs, but also just to do general things within GitHub Actions. Because again, Actions isn't just CI/CD. The goal is to enable workflows in your repository, to automate common tasks in your repository. And you can actually build these yourself. It's really, really easy, as my coworker Jeff has done. I'm not sure how many people have seen Untitled Goose Game. If you haven't, you should really check this game out. The idea of Untitled Goose Game is that you're a goose in this friendly, lovely town, and the townspeople that live here are lovely townspeople, and you, the goose, you harass these people. You chase them around town honking. You steal their things. You are just a terrible, terrible goose. Now, armed with this idea, Jeff has created the worst GitHub action that I've ever seen. You can start out with a lovely GitHub issue, and if you leave a comment, now I'm going to run a workflow. Let's take a look at what is actually going on. I have let me go to the code first. I have a GitHub Actions workflow described, and it will run not on not on push, not on pull request. There we go. This workflow that I'm running runs on issue comment. So anytime somebody creates an issue comment, i.e. comments on an issue, it will run my friend Jeff's action. Okay, well, if we take a look, click into the workflow, we can see that it's done some work. Deleted comment. What? What's happened? Let's go back to our issue. Oh, see? Oh, yes. And if we hit reload, the comment that I added has been deleted and it's been replaced with an angry goose. Turns out that his action will delete any comment that doesn't have the word honk in it. It's truly a terrible action. Now, I don't say this to suggest that you should use this in your repositories. In fact, please don't, unless you just really want all your coworkers to hate you. But I do suggest that it's an opportunity for you to consider the ways that you can automate things in your repository. So you can add labels. That's something that we do a lot on my team. We add labels to issues automatically based on the state or based on comments that occur in an issue, or even things that happen in other issues, because many times issues are dependent upon one another. And so we can actually automate these sorts of things so that we don't have to think about it so hard. And if you want to get started building your own action, we have a toolkit for you. Again, I mentioned that they're generally written in JavaScript as node applications. You can also still provide a Docker container. I mentioned that early, that was the original place where actions were stored, were in Docker containers. You can still do that. However, it does limit you to just running on the Linux platforms. So we encourage you to use our toolkit and build an action to automate whatever you want and share amongst your repositories, and we would encourage you to do it in JavaScript. And you can even just click right here and get started with a template. This will basically new up a new repository for you with, you can just click use this template, and now you've got your own action. So I'm really, really excited about GitHub Actions, as you can imagine. I hope that you are interested in using it to automate things within your repository and even create actions that other people can use within their workflows. Just please, please be a little nicer than this one. So thank you so much. I'm happy to take questions. Please don't hesitate to contact me. You can reach me on Twitter. That's probably the best place to reach me. I'm Thomson. So feel free to reach out.